This is our video on Jeffery Dahmer, the murderer.
On July 22nd, 1991, infamous serial killer and cannibal Jeffery Dahmer was arrested by Milwaukee police. The murderer was responsible for the slayings of 17 boys and men of Asian, Latino, and African American descent. Dahmer is one of America's most well-known serial killers because of his gruesome tactics and the ghastly fact that not only would he rape, kill, and dismember his victims, he'd also eat and cook their bodies. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He was described as energetic and happy until the age of 4, when surgery to correct the double hernia seemed to affect the child in a major way. He became increasingly withdrawn following the birth of his younger brother and the family frequent moves. By his early teens, he was disengaged, tense, and largely friendless.
Dahmer claims that the compulsion towards necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14, but it appeared that the breakdown of his parents' marriage and their divorce a few years later may have been the catalyst for these thoughts turning into actions. By the time of his first killing, Dahmer had become addicted to alcohol and later dropped out of university.
Dahmer's first murder occurred just after graduating high school in June 1978 when he picked up a hitchhiker, Steve Hicks. He got the man drunk, and when he tried to leave, Dahmer killed him, striking him in the head and strangling him with a barbell. Dahmer dismembered his corpse and packed his body parts in a plastic bag and buried them. He later exhumed the remains and the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them. In September of 1987, another victim, Steve Toomey, booked a hotel with him and drank, and Dahmer eventually woke up to Toomey dead with no recollection from the previous night's activities. They moved the corpse into his grandma's basement, where he dismembered and masturbated on the corpse before disposing of the remains. Only after Dahmer killed another 2 victims at his grandmother's house did she get tired of her grandson's drunken late nights. Although oblivious to his other activities, she forced him to move out in 1988.
On September 1989, Dahmer had extremely lucky escape. An encounter with a 13-year-old Laotian boy resulted in charges of sexual exploitation and second-degree sexual assault. He pleaded guilty, claiming that the boy had appeared much older. While awaiting sentencing for his sexual assault case, Dahmer again put his grandmother's basement to gruesome use. In March 1989, he lured, drugged, strangled, sodomized, photographed, dismembered, and disposed of Anthony Sears, an aspiring model. At his trial for child molestation on May 1989, Dahmer was the model contrition, arguing eloquently in his own defense about how he had seen the error in his ways and that his arrest marked a turning point in his life. His counsel argued that he needed help, not incarceration. The judge agreed. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison on day release, allowing Dahmer to maintain his day job and 5 years probation.
Just so y'all know, this is a very weird individual. Sick person. Very sick.
After,
Just keep going.
after escaping prison with his charm and intelligence, did he accumulate 13 other murders, rape cases. He developed ritual and experimented with chemical means of disposing and often consuming the flesh of his victims. He attempted crude drilling into the victim's head and putting in acid in order to control them. On May 27, 1991, Dahmer's neighbor Sandra Smith called the police to report that an Asian boy was running naked in the street. When the police community arrived to the largely poor African American, he claimed that the boy was his 19-year-old lover. In fact, the boy was 14 years old and a brother of Laotian teen Dahmer had molested 3 years earlier. The police escorted Dahmer and the boy home, clearly not wishing to become embroiled in a homosexual domestic disturbance. They took only a look before leaving. Once the police left, Dahmer killed the boy. Had they conducted a basic search, they would have found the body of the 12th victim, Tony Hughes. He killed 4 more before his.
This man, he's just awful. Dahmer's killing spree ended when he was arrested on July 22nd, 1991. The body parts found in Dahmer's refrigerator and Polaroid photographs of his victims became inextricably associated with his notorious killing spree. 2 Milwaukee police officers were led to Dahmer when they picked up Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old African-American man who was wandering the streets with handcuffs dangling from his wrist. They decided to investigate the man's claims that a weird dude had drugged and restrained him. They arrived at Dahmer's apartment, where he calmly offered to get the keys for the handcuffs. Edwards claimed that the knife Dahmer had threatened him with was in the bedroom. When the officer went in to corroborate the story, he noticed Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies lying around. Dahmer was subdued by the officers. Subsequent searches revealed a head in the refrigerator, 3 more in the freezer, and a catalog of horrors, including preserved skulls, jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of Polaroid photographs of his victims. Dahmer's trial began in January of 1992. Given that the majority of Dahmer's victims were African American, there were considerable race tensions, so strict security precautions were taken, including an 8-foot barrier of bulletproof glass that separated him from the gallery. The inclusion of only one African American on the jury provoked further unrest, but was ultimately contained and short-lived. Lionel Dahmer and his second wife attended the trial throughout. Dahmer initially pleaded not guilty to all charges despite having confessed to the killings during police interrogation. He eventually changed his plea to guilty by virtue of insanity. The jury chose to believe the prosecution's assertion that Dahmer was fully aware that his acts were evil and chose to commit them anyway. On February 15, 1992, they returned after approximately 10 hours deliberation to find him guilty but sane on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison with a 16th term tacked on in May. Dahmer reportedly adjusted well to prison life, although he was initially kept apart from the general population. He eventually convinced authorities to allow him to integrate more fully with other inmates. He found religion in the form of books and photos sent to him by his father. He was granted permission by the Columbia Correctional Institution to be baptized by a local pastor. He died in prison after 16 terms. Somebody killed him. He needed to be killed in the first place. He did not need to be in prison. Okay? Jeffrey Dahmer was killed on November 28, 1994, by his fellow prison inmate Christopher Scarver. In accordance with his inclusion in regular work details, Dahmer was assigned to work with the 2 other convicted murderers, Scarver and Jesse Anderson. After they had left alone to complete their task, guards returned to find that Scarver had brutally beaten both men with a metal bar from the prison weight room. Dahmer was pronounced dead after approximately 1 hour. Anderson succumbed to his injuries days later. In 2015, Christopher Scarver spoke to the New York Post about his reasons for killing Dahmer. Scarver alleged that he was disturbed not only by Dahmer's crimes, but by a habit Dahmer had developed of fashioning severed limbs from prison food to antagonize other inmates. After being taunted by Dahmer and Anderson during their work details, Scarver said that he confronted Dahmer about his crimes before beating the 2 men to death. He also claimed that prison guards allowed the murders to happen by leaving them alone. So see, that was the smart move. He should have been put on death row in the first place. Never been put in prison. Y'all got any thoughts?
He was just
crazy.
Honestly, it
crazy.
shouldn't even been death row. They should have just killed him that day.
Yeah, really.
Right.
Very sick individual. Very. I don't see how they could let somebody live like that.